Hello, I'm Simon Good, and in this video, I'll be talking about strategies to stay calm during an argument. I'm a professional mediator, I have a degree in psychology as well as an MBA, and I'll be explaining that fight or flight response that happens to us when we're in conflict, as well as some methods that we can use to try and keep a level head, even if the other person's being aggressive and unreasonable. So, if we think about strategies to help ourselves stay calm, first we need to understand what's actually going on in our brain when we're in fight or flight mode. If we think about our brain as broken down into these three different areas on the screen, the top section in behind our forehead is the rational bit of our brain, sometimes called the executive section of the brain. It's responsible for planning, evaluating options, making decisions, and it tends to operate in a very logical, rational, and careful way. It's aware of the consequences of our behavior. The middle section of our brain, in behind our ears, is what's called the limbic system, also sometimes referred to as the emotional section of our brain. It's where we process feelings. It tends to operate more subconsciously. And connected to the limbic system is what's called the amygdala that scans for threats. The amygdala looks for signs of any potential danger, and then it reacts with the fight or flight response. Historically, these have been mainly physical threats, an animal or someone wanting to attack us, but it can also be triggered for things like social rejection, shame and embarrassment, remembering that thing that you said that came out wrong, or someone pointing out the fact that you're being illogical in what you're arguing for example. That reason that upsets us so much is because it's the potential cause of shame. The amygdala triggers that fight or flight response, and the limbic system feels all sorts of strong feelings like anger and frustration and despair and exhaustion or whatever else it might be. At the bottom section of our brain, at the bottom of our skull, the top of our neck, I've called it the autopilot brain. It's mainly subconscious processes like regulating our heart rate, breathing, body temperature, that kind of thing. In terms of the upper section of our brain, though, we can break that down further into the left or the right sections. The left part of the brain tends to operate in more of a logical, rational, linear way. It has a focus on planning, it's more detail oriented, and tends to be more cautious or aware of consequences of choices or behavior. The right brain, by contrast, operates in much more of an intuitive way, focused much more on bigger picture elements, more random and scattered, tends to be more emotional. It's active when we empathize, whether that's making a mental picture of the other person and what they're thinking and feeling and needing, or we demonstrate empathy, like showing the other person that we understand where they're coming from. It tends to be more creative and adventurous and plays an important role in calming down the stress response. So, if we're going to find a way to effectively keep calm, we need to come up with a strategy that will connect with each of those three different layers, for want of a better word, of the brain, as well as increasing the integration between the right and the left hemispheres. So, the first strategy that we can use is breathing. It's more effective if you use your nose, breathing slowly and deeply. So, one method is to let all of your breath out, a really slow, long exhale, fully emptying your lungs. Then breathe in again slowly, inhale again. Pause and then breathe in a little bit more. Take another sip of breath. Hold that and then fully exhale that breath out. And if you do that cycle 3 or 4 times, it will slow down your heart rate, calm your body physically, which sends messages to our brain that it's under control. We can get through this. You can start to deactivate that fight or flight response. This particular method of breathings I've learnt from Dr. Andrew Huberman, and I use it myself, and I've taught, gosh, I don't know, probably hundreds of clients at this stage. This effective method at staying calm, often as we're preparing for a mediation session that's got reasonably high levels of emotion attached. The next thing that we can do, focus our attention. We can focusing on our senses, on the present, which anchors our focus on the present and stops us from worrying too much about the past and the future. So some potential options for doing that: paying attention to what you can physically feel. What's the temperature in the room? Is there any breeze? How close is the other person standing to me? That kind of thing. Also paying attention to our other senses, like our hearing. Is there a sound of traffic outside the office, or birds, or the hum of the air conditioner? Wiggling your toes is something that I find really helpful, and just feeling what can you feel in your socks and your shoes, or paying attention to your posture, which bits of your back are connecting, how are you sitting at the moment. So we can pay attention to sight, smell, that kind of thing, what we can feel, or we can pay attention to what we can feel internally. Are there any parts of your brain that are tight? Is there any agitation that's sitting there? Are you sweating? Can you feel your face getting flushed? Again, paying attention to these things mean that we anchor our focus in the present, and it increases the chances of us being able to manage it as we work back towards equilibrium. If we're not aware of those things happening and building up, our brain starts to panic because it thinks that, oh, this must be a big threat. I can see his face is flushed, which further activates that fight or flight response. The final thing that we could do is pay attention to what our mind is focusing on. Does my mind keep going back to the contract and the fact that this person clearly doesn't know what they're talking about? Is my mind going to the fact that I might get in trouble if this client dumps us and goes with a different vendor in terms of business that they're doing? My mind is probably paying attention to a lot of stuff in the past and the future. And if I can pay attention to that, it lets me bring back focus to what's important, like the goals of this particular meeting that we're in at the moment, or the fact that I don't need to convince the other person to believe what I believe. Maybe it's okay that we walk away with two different views about this, and then I can go to a plan B, like talking to my boss about potential ways to resolve the issues. The third thing that we can do is name our emotions. We have this generic type of response to emotions, so it's easy to misattribute the cause. So what are you feeling? Putting a name on it invites the rational section of our brain to process it, even though emotions are typically managed by that middle part of the brain, the limbic system. And then what else are you feeling? It's probably not just embarrassment. It's a little bit of hope for this thing. It's a little bit of concern or worry about this thing. It's a little bit, I'm glad or relieved about this thing. When we can, it's called emotional granularization, when we can go down to this next level of detail, which increases our ability to manage those emotions, particularly the negative ones. It's increasing the operation of that right hemisphere, which again strengthens our ability to help us to calm down. What else are you feeling physically? Is your heart racing? Are you feeling your hands clenching? You're so angry? And then try to choose a neutral and mutual label, even for the conflict between you and the other person, saying something like, look, I know this situation's getting quite heated. I know that it's a really important issue for both of us, and the fact that it's been building up for months means that there's a lot sitting there and it's getting stirred up as we're finally getting a chance to talk about it. That will be much more effective at naming and acknowledging and validating to some extent what's going on, compared to saying something like, this other person's such a jerk, I just don't want to be here. I can't believe they're doing this to me. They're so unreasonable. Of course, that doesn't set the scene for any problem solving or solution or future focus. Looking at the issue that you're in conflict or an argument about is the next option that you have. How would you describe what's going on to someone else? It's easy to get caught up in almost like a hysterical view of the situation, to overly assume how critically important this is or how urgent it is to get to a result. Maybe it's okay just to say, look, I'm talking with the builder who's building my house, and at the moment we've got different views on whether or not there'll be an additional cost to make these changes. Just describing it in that neutral way tends to make it feel a lot more manageable, because that limbic system, the amygdala, the threat response, doesn't have as much to latch onto. Where are things stuck? Maybe there's some things that you agree on and others you don't. What's the influence of context? Maybe the other person's not acting the way they are because they're a jerk. Maybe it's just that they're under a lot of pressure from their boss at the moment, or they're going through a divorce or mental health issues. If we can include some hypothetical reasons why the other person's acting the way they are, it tends to mean that their behavior doesn't trigger us or push our buttons in the same way. How important is this? How urgent is this? Maybe if you step back, it's not such a big deal as you think. And if this conflict could be purely logical, what would be needed? I use this technique a lot when I'm doing training with construction companies, because they say it's just about money or it's just rational. Of course, for them and for the other side, there's a lot more going on, including emotions. But I usually give a bit of airtime to that first. I say, well, look, let's just assume this is just purely rational, purely logical. What information do you need to give them? What do you need? How can you see this moving forward? And then I say, if it's not just purely rational, what else might be needed? An apology, feeling understood and acknowledged, feeling important, feeling a sense of control. If you can offer the other person or the other party all of these things in an argument, it might mean that they start to calm down. But you can engage the left section of your brain here by looking at the issue in much more of a rational, logical way. If you get stuck and you tend to react a lot, you might even write these questions down in a post-it note and put it underneath your computer monitor, or remind yourself about this before you go into a difficult meeting, for example. Setting goals also engages the left side of our brain. What's the goal for us? Even in the short term, like, what do I need to achieve right now? How do I want to act in this meeting that's coming up? If they're being unreasonable, what is a reasonable response that I should use? What's my goal for others? Maybe there's other team members that I'm concerned about, and that's driving me to be so furious about something that my team leader's doing. Maybe I have a goal for my relationship with the team leader. That will be an important referee for me to get a promotion, so I don't want to completely burn my bridges. And medium and longer term, is it something like a promotion? If I'm not going to be staying in this job for very long, it probably doesn't matter what the other person thinks of me unless I'm going to be working with them after I leave. But in the moment, it's easy to lose sight of that as we develop tunnel vision, particularly during an argument. We should focus on things that we can control. So you could ask yourself, well, what can I control here? And focus there, of course. It's usually things to do with your behavior, so what you say and what you do. There'll also be some things that you can influence, like the other person's behavior. I can ask them to stop swearing or interrupting me or whatever else it is, but ultimately I can't make them do it, probably. There's consequences I can use, but in the moment I can't physically stop them doing something. And then there'll be some things that are just completely outside of my control. Our organization's process for dealing with bullying complaints, the legislation around COVID lockdowns. There's endless examples of these, and what tends to happen is that when we're in conflict, when we're in an argument, we ruminate and focus and obsess on things that are not useful because there's nothing that we can do about it. So if we can find a way to let go of those elements that are completely outside of our control, we focus on things that we can control or ways that we can expand our circle of influence, it tends to mean that the situation feels a lot more manageable because there's things that we can do to influence the situation. Whereas if we're sitting here feeling like we have no control, no influence, all of these things are going wrong and there's nothing we can do about it, it increases the chances of things like burnout, for example. Empathizing, what do you think's going on for the other person, is the next strategy that we might use. How would they describe things? What do they want? What do they feel? When we go through even just the mental exercise of asking ourselves these questions, it's increasing the activation of that right side of the brain, which means that we're not just purely focused on logic, etc., and increases our ability to demonstrate empathy, to help the other person to feel heard, to acknowledge even if we disagree, and to keep ourselves calm during the process. So even if you don't show or tell the other person that you've thought through their perspective, going through the exercise of thinking about it, creating that mental mind map in your head about the other person can also still be incredibly helpful just for you. The final things that we could do, these are mostly useful for situations where you're dealing with conflict across a number of different situations. So not just during an argument, but maybe there's an argument that's been going on for a few days and you have a chance to think or reset. The two things that tend to be helpful is release and finding a way to turn the page or reset. For release, it might be things like yelling, crying, screaming at full volume, like, I can't believe this. But even like I've just done it there, like a lower speaking volume, clenching our fist, letting go of some of those emotions that are sitting there might mean that we feel a lot more calm. Hit a physical punching bag, throw darts at the dartboard, throw rocks at the beach, whatever you need to get rid of some of that physical and emotional energy and tension that's sitting there. Debriefing can be really helpful. It engages that empathy side of our brain when we feel heard and understood, which helps us to feel more calm. So often, if you've got someone who's really good at listening, it's really helpful to go and talk to them about that after you've been in conflict. If you don't have someone to talk to, writing it down is the next best option. So journaling, just doing a dump, using a pen and paper and just writing everything that you're thinking and feeling might mean that you're in a different mindset. Just flick back to that slide so you have a chance to see those other items on the list there. So I hope that this video has been helpful for you. This is a new thing for me, preparing videos in this kind of format. So let me know any tweaks or changes that I can make for next time around. If you've got other topics related to conflict, dispute resolution, difficult conversations, let me know. I'd be more than happy to use a case study and show how I analyze and approach different scenarios, or explain some of the practical tools that I talk about in conflict resolution training that work with workshops that I run for organizations. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Let me know any comments as well, or questions. I'd be more than happy to reply to those in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.